Welcome to Legislative Link, a program designed to connect you with your state leaders at the state capitol. I'm your host, Brent Stoddard, the Public Affairs Director with the City of Glendale. And today I'm honored to have with me as our guest, Representative Paul Boyer. Thanks for joining us today, Paul.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So you are a West Valley lifelong resident. Your parents live in Glendale. You grew up here. What is it about Arizona and particularly the West Valley that you love?
I grew up here. I went to school here. Got both degrees from ASU West. I went to Deer Valley High School. It's just the West Valley is where it's at.
Exactly. Well, your involvement at the legislature, you represent District 20, which is represents the city of Glendale as well as Phoenix. Particularly in relation to the city of Glendale, I believe it's from Bell Road all the way down to Olivet, as far west as 67th Avenue, maybe a little bit in a little corner that peaks into 75th, but most of the demarcation line is 67th Avenue, then into the northwest portion of Phoenix. Talk a little bit about the district. It's a fairly large-sized district geographically with a wide set of demographics. Tell us a little bit about District 20 from your perspective.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a lot of residential area and then a lot of schools. We have the largest elementary school district in the state, and that's Washington Elementary. We also have, of course, ASU at the West Campus, which is where I went.
Sure.
And then, of course, we have Midwestern. I mean, there's just a lot of education in this particular district.
So education, not only a passion of yours, it's also a profession. You're a 10th grade teacher.
That's right.
What is your experience? You know, who are better behaved, 10th graders or the House of Representatives at the state capitol?
It depends on the issue, and I'll leave it at that, and you can decide who behaves better. Sometimes, members, it's late, and we like to get a little cheeky, and last night Don Shooter's testimony was pretty fun. But for the most part, we can be pretty well behaved.
What do your students think about the fact that they have a teacher there that's also a state legislator that's down there forming public policy? We see a lot of engagement, especially nowadays, of the youth in all kinds of political issues. Do you have those type of discussions in the classroom?
You know, we don't. I cover 500 years of history from the Italian Renaissance up into about the Cold War, and then also 8 great books, and we just literally don't have time. And I wish I could, but I just never get to the modern era, and so we never really get a chance to talk about it. I might be able to illustrate a point. So, like, for example, Louis XIV built Versailles. He spent half the treasury. And so I say, how much do we spend annually? And they say, about 3 trillion, 3.2 trillion. Like, so take half of that, and if you built a new White House, what would that look like? And their eyes just blow up. Right. So that would be one example, but I don't bring in, do you like Trump or do you like Hillary or whatever.
Interesting. Now, most people are intrigued to find out that the legislature, especially at a state level, are not career-long politicians. You are everyday people, you're school teachers. But when did you first get your start in politics? When did you feel that kind of first passion to be involved?
I was the editor-in-chief at ASU West, the student newspaper, and there was a suicide bombing in Israel in 2002. I never thought for the life of me I'd be a politician. I thought either a journalist or a pastor, and when that happened, it floored me. I couldn't understand why someone would want to do that. And so I just decided to learn everything I could about the issue. Ended up getting a trip to Israel, and then I ended up interning for John Shadegg, who was my congressman at the time, and he recommended me to work on the Bush-Cheney campaign. So that was my first paid gig back in 2004.
Right. So now you're a state legislature, you're involved, you're active. What was the key moment where you decided you're going to make a transition from just being passionate and studying and looking at to the point where you said, maybe I want to run for office? How did you make that decision?
Well, I needed a job, and so I ended up applying at the House. So I was on House Majority staff doing communications for the Speaker and for the Republicans in the House for 3 years. And then there were 2 open seats. So if some folks might remember Linda Gray and Jim Wires. Sure. They both retired the same year. And I thought, if there's ever a time to run, it's now. And I've knocked on so many doors for John Shadegg, and so it kind of became second nature, if you will, and it was a lot easier when I started knocking on doors for myself. So
you knocked on a door and listed your own name instead of others. Yeah.
It was a unique turn because I'm so used to, and I love John Shadegg and how good of a man he is, but then the focus was on myself and, okay, why are you qualified? And then I'd have to talk about my experience and, because when you knock on the door, folks are busy and you got to give them the 1 minute, floor speech, if you will.
Sure. Now, your time at the legislature, you've been involved and have championed a lot of major legislation. Your involvement in the jobs bill, which is a large contributing factor when we were in the recession to getting jobs going and growth back into the state. But one of the issues that you particularly took a leadership role on was the defense of children, particularly in the area of internet crimes against children. Kind of talk about why you funneled in, why you focused on that as a priority, and your experience in pushing House Bill 2517.
Yeah, so it's a tough issue to talk about. Every time I talk about it, it never gets any easier. These kids, usually the victims are known victims, meaning it's a family member, it's a friend of the family, it's a relative who are abusing these children. Come to find out that Arizona is sadly, one of the worst in the nation as far as the number of images and videos that people are downloading, like thousands and thousands of images and videos of these kids being just abused in the worst ways imaginable. And come to find out there's 15,000 unique IP addresses. Those are either computer devices, whatever, that are downloading this horrific material. And come to find out, when I was starting to do my homework, is there was only at the time 4 full-time investigators to proactively go after these guys. And so since then, I got some funding, $1 million a year. We were able to hire 2 more investigators. I'm still in the process of working with Phoenix to hire more investigators. We got a few more civilians as well, and they actually rescued 75 kids last year, that task force.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you've done a lot of work, obviously, not only with the children, but public safety is a component of that, and you've been a great champion of public safety at the legislature, and a lot of your bills have to do with public safety and protecting those employees and others. Talk about your relationship with public safety and why that's also an important issue for you.
Sure. So the one that came up is, for me at least, was Proposition 205. That was the recreational commercialization of marijuana. And a lot of times when I think about policy, I think about my students. And not that there's a major problem in my school, there's not, but I can imagine, and not just my students, but statewide, that if it becomes normalized, the perception of risk will be so much lower, and you'll have more kids using it. That particular proposition, they removed the driving while high component. In other words, you couldn't be penalized for driving while high. That was one problem, and with our Voter Protection Act, we couldn't fix that if it had passed at the ballot. And so that one, I took such an active role that I didn't knock on a single door or make a single phone call for myself this last election cycle. My sole focus was 3 or 4 nights a week talking about 205, building up to November.
Yeah. Now, right now, it seems like Prop 106, which passed, which was the minimum wage increase, was the topic du jour of the day. But at the time, during the election cycle, Prop 205, the initiative to allow recreational marijuana, was really the hot button issue, and of course that proposition failed by slightly over 51%. And you were one of the leaders that kind of led the opposition in that. Is the topic over for Arizona, or is this an issue that's going to continue to keep coming back as we see other states start to incrementally legalize the recreational use of marijuana?
It's already coming back. So there is an organization called Safer Arizona, and they want just a straight up legalization. They've already filed, and they're ready for 1.5 years from now for the next election cycle. And so I foresee this coming up probably every 4 years.
Right. Now, what are your other priorities this session? Legislators are able to introduce a certain number of bills up to a certain deadline, and we've already passed that deadline. What is some of the key legislation that you're focused on this year?
Well, I'll tell you the most important one, and that's firefighters and cancer.
Okay.
So we have right now, it's 16 years old, a law in the books that it's a presumption law. So there's a certain list of cancers that if a firefighter with a few certain criteria, they started the job with a clean bill of health, they worked in hazardous duty for 5 years, and they were in a fire situation that was linked to a carcinogen that could potentially cause cancer, that it's presumed that these particular cancers, that they got it on the job. So we're adding a list of 12 different cancers to that presumption list. That just passed out of the House 54-2 or something like that. It passed overwhelmingly. It just passed the House. It's really important to me just because firefighters are getting cancer at younger ages and at a higher proportion than the general public. And so, and based on the science, we believe that these particular cancers are, you're more prone to get them if you are a firefighter. No matter what kind of protective gear they use, The problem is no protective gear can really insulate them from the exposures to toxins, to carcinogens, to gases, and so forth.
Great. So in addition to your own legislative priorities, obviously the leadership and the governor are looking at their priorities, particularly when it comes to the budget. Education funding is one of the major issues that's come up in the state. The governor, as part of his State of the State address, is pushing additional funds into the education. What are some of your thoughts as the legislature and state leaders start taking a closer look at the funding of education in this state?
Yeah, so I'm thrilled with the governor's budget. I am. I would have signed it yesterday if it, or I'm not sorry, signed. I would have voted for it yesterday if it was on the board, because I've never seen a budget that's so focused on education funding. He's taken some criticism because of the 2% raise over 4 years for teachers, but here's the deal. That's guaranteed to go to teachers as far as a raise is concerned. But there's inflation funding. There are other funding, Prop 123, that we can't control. We could say at the legislature, we're going to micromanage every single district, and we're going to direct the funds, say, solely to teacher pay or to buildings or to services or whatever. But we let local governing boards determine where that money should go. But the point is, there's available money that is there for teachers. This is just guaranteed money that will go to teachers. 73% of all new funding in this budget goes towards education. And so I love to see the emphasis on education funding. I'm thrilled with it. Obviously, it's not enough, but we have other priorities. We have healthcare, public safety. There's so many other issues that we have to fund. Sure. But it really is a priority this year.
And of course, that education also has an impact on every sector of the state of Arizona, including for the city's economic development. As we're looking to attract businesses, one of the things that they're interested in is the quality of education, the workforce that's coming out of those educational institutions to be able to fill up, hopefully, their high wage paying jobs. And so it's certainly a topic that is important to a lot of different people, including the state legislature, cities and towns, and the business community as a whole. Now, you're a veteran legislator. This isn't your first session. You've now been through 4 sessions, is it? Or how many legislative sessions?
Yeah, this is my 5th, but you're right.
This is your 5th legislative session, so you've completed 4. You're into your 5th now. What is it about the is there something that you wish, if you could have gone back and talked to Representative Boyer as a new freshman legislator, is there something you could have, a piece of advice that you could have given a young legislator like that, now being a veteran, about how to work at the legislature? Yeah,
so I would say 2 things. I would say pick a topic area and become a specialist in that area, because when it comes to these issues, I was on staff for 3 years, and I talked to the media about pretty much education, public safety, and healthcare. Those are the 3 issues that came up. I thought that I knew policy pretty well. And as a state legislator, when you actually have to push the button and you actually have to vote on bills, I realize how little I do know and how much I need to study up on every single issue as they come up. And so I would say specialize in something, and also don't commit too early. Really take the time to learn the issue before you say yes or no to any particular piece of legislation. And I will say one more thing, only friends and potential friends, no enemies.
Exactly. So you're involved in social media, and you're active on there. The youth, obviously, it's a way to engage quickly with people. What interaction do you have with the constituents and the citizens? Do you use it a tool to have dialogue, or is it just something you use to communicate your message? How are you using those social media tools?
So the only real reason I use Facebook is for my campaign website.
Okay.
And I use Twitter, and I focus on Twitter quite a bit more, just because it's a lot easier for me. And between my teaching job and my legislative job, it's difficult sometimes. Email is usually the best for me, and I do try and get to every email. But I probably don't use social media as much as I should. Yeah. I need to focus more on doing that.
Sure. Now, one of the parts of Legislative Link is, of course, educating the citizens to get to know their legislators. But in addition to just getting to know their legislators, what advice do you have for citizens and people that see an issue out there that they've either got a question about, or they want to engage on, or they see something they feel like they could add some value to in a conversation? What advice do you have to the citizens about getting engaged in a legislative process at the state capitol, which can seem intimidating, and the process itself is long and people are not sure? What advice would you have for citizens?
I'd say call my office and come down and meet with me. Send me an email. Phone calls are great. Emails are great too, just because when I get a free moment, either if it's at midnight or if it's at 5 a.m. when I get up to start doing some class prep, and I'll devote a chunk of time, like an hour a day, just to responding to constituents. And so I would say just, yeah, those personal emails really go a long way.
Okay. And then if they want to get involved in an issue that may not necessarily be in your committee, is there any advice about how to approach the legislature as a whole? Should they, you mentioned about getting educated on a bill, you thought you understood policy before. What's the best way for people to really have their voices heard with the legislative body, whether it's in a committee or a bill that they're watching move through?
Yeah, so I would start with, first off, your own legislators, your one senator and your 2 representatives. So at azleg.gov, there's a find my representatives or find my legislators, and you can figure out who they are. And from that point, though, if there's a particular issue, say it's education, find out who the education chairman is in the House and the Senate, and then I would reach out to them, and then reach out to all the committee members on that particular committee. Say it's public safety, then do the same thing. Find who the chair is in the House and the Senate, and then find the members on those committees, and then just start reaching out. Personal phone calls, personal emails, they really do go a long way.
Sure. Well, great. Well, thank you for joining us today. This was a very interesting and eye-opening conversation, and as citizens get to know their legislators and the process a little bit better, we hope they'll be engaged and get involved in the things that they want to that have an impact on their community. So thank you for joining us today.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Representative. And of course, if you would like to get more information about the legislative process, how to get involved, you can visit our Intergovernmental Programs website, which is at glendale.az/intergovernmental. There's a lot of great resources on that website, information about how to contact your legislators. There's a picture of Representative Boyer and all his contact information on there, as well as the other legislators who represent the city of Glendale. You can see district maps of our state legislative districts, congressional maps, and there's a whole set of resources and tools that will help you and assist you getting information and engaged at the legislature. In addition to that, we have our weekly legislative link email, which provides a email tracking list to neighborhood leaders and community leaders and anyone that's interested in specific bills that may be of impact to your communities. And we provide that on a weekly basis, posted online, as well as provided in an email. So feel free to log on there and to sign up and to get that information, which will be valuable as you begin to engage with the legislature. So with that, we will see you next time on your Legislative Link.